Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm doing a bit of a palette cleanse. I've been doing too many orcs recently and the last bunch of kits are just going to be kind of boring for me. So I decided to go back with a Lord of Blights. This is like the 4th or 5th time I have done this model kit. But I've sold all my previous ones and I actually want one for my own personal army, so here we are. Alright, so first we're going to prime our model with Bright Touch Grey Carp Primer, as always. Very simple, easily done. And then we're going to move on to pre-coating. So with Dawnstone, Pallid Witchflesh, and White Scar White, and I don't show it here, but Lamian Medium as well, we're going to do the pre-coating. So with an airbrush, we're going to spray Dawnstone from the underside. I don't want it, the darker coat to not to be too dark, otherwise it's not going to go well with the washes and inks kind of way of painting I paint. And so with Dawnstone first, and then we're going to take Pallid Witchflesh in the airbrush, and we're going to spray it down from the top, 45 degrees, try to get at least a little bit of layer on every part. And then we're going to use White Scar White and a dry brush, and we're going to dry brush the entire model. Now I do switch to a smaller dry brush because this one can't really fit into all the details, so I do switch to a smaller one and get into the nooks and crannies here and there. And then once that's done, I take some of the White Scar White I still had, and then I mix it with some Lamian Medium to make it flow better, and then I take a brush and then I do specific highlights on like his feet armor, the metal plates, some parts on his chest and areas where I don't want, like, you know, sometimes you dry brush, you have like that foggy, cloudy effect. Well, I have good dry brushes, so that barely happens, but still, I apply this here to cover that up and also apply like a more focused highlight in certain areas. So this is more of an artistic thing, but it works well. Alright, with Rakarth Flesh, Lamian Medium, and I was a little ahead of myself, but not Pallid Witchflesh, that'll come later. But basically, we do our wash, we mix sort of 1-to-1 with Lamian Medium, Rakarth Flesh, and a little bit of water to make it flow better, and I apply it all over the skin. I'm going for a very light, sick, dead flesh look. And then once that's done, I also in the end go back with Ungor Flesh and like fill in his boils, because I figure that a few steps are pretty gonna overlap, and might as well fill these in right now. Alright, now we're going to make an oil wash with Burnt Umber and Mineral Spirits. We're going to apply this all over the flesh that we just painted. Now, this wash was a little thin, so I let it dry with a hairdryer, probably applied a second coat, and then I wiped with a makeup sponge. Now the first wipe was pretty much all over because I wanted only the deepest, darkest recesses and hard crevices to have the darkest color. Once that was done, I applied another oil wash again, 1 or 2 I believe. It depends. It depends on how thick you make the oil wash. This is something you have to do. So hopefully I would do it in one. Sometimes I don't because it's hard to measure out the exact amount of oil to mineral spirits. So I achieve the first effect, I wipe all over, then I apply a second layer of the oil wash to get over, and then when I wipe for the final time, I do these general wipes like on this front chest and belly, so that's like the center of the light, so that part looks lighter, on his right arm and such. And so I'm not doing a very thorough wiping, I'm just doing some general sweeps with the sponge to lighten certain areas. Alright, now with Rakarth Flesh and Pallid Witchflesh and Lamian Medium, so I still had a bunch of the mix I made for his skin beforehand, and so what I did was I add some Pallid Witchflesh and mixed it in, and then I just brushed it on key places to highlight. Now to note that the model is already good enough, if you're like doing a batch of these guys and stuff, it's already good enough for speed painting, alright? But we're trying to go with the extra layer, or the extra mile, yeah. And so I can't give you an exact amount because I mixed Pallid Witchflesh into my previous batch, but basically I added Pallid Witchflesh until it was a bit lighter, that's it. And then I applied it on like places where I would like highlights, more focus on certain areas of the skin to bring it out. And then I did the same thing a second time. I added even more Pallid Witchflesh in, and I did final highlights on like the most raised, obvious areas of folds of his skin or certain areas and stuff. The Lamian medium helped it to be to make the transitional colors very smooth, so there's no sharp, hard lines on here. Alright, now for some oil paint, not wash. We're going to take magenta and mix a little bit of burnt umber into it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take we're going to mix it together. It's mostly purple with a little bit of brown, and we're going to apply it to his like open cuts, sores thingy that he has on his gut. Just the area around it. We're going to take a old brush and we're just going to like feather it like back and forth a little bit to blend it in, and then apply some more, blend it in a little, and then apply some more on the very, like, how do I put it, the rim of the holes on him. This is one of the hard things about Nurgle. It's like, how do I describe a lot of this stuff? Like, yeah, so basically, yeah, blend it in, blend it in, and add in some pure around the actual holes of his body. And I did this, there's a bunch of holes all around, including the ones with the Ungor flesh bulbs, which after I did this, I then decided, okay, I'm going to add some Ungor flesh directly into the bulbs to re-highlight them, or I don't know what they would be called, bulbs or spots of open fat. Alright, with Thondia Brown, Lamian Medium, Mournfang Brown, XV88, and Burnt Umber for an oil wash, we're going to paint the wood and ropes and stuff on his back there. Alright, so first we're going to create simply a wash with Thondia Brown and Lamian Medium, sort of a 1-to-1 mix, add a little bit of water, and make it into wash and apply it all over. And then it looked really, really good, and I didn't want to use the other paints, but then I decided it's best to do this. So with Mournfang Brown, I took Mournfang Brown on the side, and then I took the wash I created of Thondia and Lamian and mixed it in, and I used this and painted the ropes. And it did all the details right there. There's depth and shadow, because this is partially still the wash, just with Mournfang Brown added in. And then I took XV88 and did the same thing. Took some XV88, put it on the side, and mixed in the Thondia Brown Lamian Medium wash into it. And I painted the leather straps that he has over his chest, on his left arm, and he has like 1 or 2 on his back, hidden, of course, a little hard to see. And then, of course, I used some pure XV88 to just highlight the strap on his chest, the top and bottom of it, just to make it stand out a bit more. And then after all that was done, I then made the oil wash and applied it all over. It was a bit of a thicker wash, and it worked out well. Looked good. Alright, with Mournfang Brown, XV88, and Lamian Medium, and Burnt Umber, we're going to do his loincloth thingies. However, I actually in the end never used XV88. So I started with making a wash of Mournfang Brown and Lamian Medium, 1-to-1-ish, with a little bit of water to make it flow, and I applied it on his loincloths. It was a bit thin at first, but it looked good. And so then I applied a second wash of this, slightly watered down more, onto the front, and a little bit onto the back, but then like I thought that it wasn't that good to apply a second coat. I like, for some reason, the front cloth worked better or worked worse, and the back cloth somehow took the wash better. Don't know how. And then I applied an oil wash in between of the Burnt Umber. And then I went to highlight again using the wash I created with Mournfang Brown, and then like I just didn't like it. I did the whole front, and then I looked at the back, and it's like, the back looks actually pretty good with just this wash. So then I changed my mind and I tried to fix it. So how I fix it is I took Burnt Umber for an oil wash and a little bit of black. Very little, because this color is very strong, so you use very little. And so turned that into wash, and I applied it to the entirety of the front loincloth and the bottom loincloth on his back. And then I just took a sponge and then just did some basic wiping just straight down so that it would get only the most raised areas of the cloth, and it looked good. Alright, with Plaguebearer's Flesh and Skeleton Horde Contrast Paint, we are going to add some color to those heads. Now, lore-wise, those heads are essentially grenades. So, first we're going to start with pure Skeleton Horde Contrast. One of the heads has like bones sticking out, so I'm just going to apply a layer of Skeleton Horde Contrast. Just simple, easy, done, and that skull is done. And then with some watered-down Plaguebearer's Flesh, I then apply a very thin coat on it just to greenify the heads. And I don't want it to pool, I just want to apply a thin layer so it just changes it to a sickly green. Alright, from this point on we're essentially done with the non-metals, mostly. So with AK Interactive Ultra Matte Varnish, I apply this all over everything we have painted. Alright, time for metals. So I start off with Gloss Varnish, Runefang Steel Air, this Sap Green Liquitex ink, and this Transparent Raw Sienna. So essentially I add a bunch of Runefang Steel into a little spot. I add like a drop or two of the Gloss Varnish to help it shine and to maintain consistency. And then I add like a drop of this Sap Green color and the Raw Sienna to give it sort of an olive color. I add couple extra drops. The thing is though, with this kind of stuff you have to be careful with how many drops of Liquitex ink, because the gloss varnish is to keep it from turning into water and also to maintain the shine, and too many drops of the Liquitex ink really kind of turns it into the whole thing into an ink instead of like a special wash, so you have to be careful how much you put in. So the olive color wasn't that strong, but basically I gave the entire guy neon armor. And it took 2 coats of this. It's just the way it happened. I wanted to do it with 1, but 2 was necessary because of how thinned out the paint was because of how much ink was put in. I then repeated the same steps to make the ink, Runefang Steel with some gloss varnish, and then this time I added raw sienna to create a brass. However, it was so light I had to add around 3 coats of this. The circles that are on his shield, his 2 bells that he has, and the circles on his metal hammer. I did that later because I missed a step. And then I did the metal on the hammer. I originally wanted to do this as stone, but I thought that would be dumb. And so I went with metal, and so I used a little bit of the black ink and made my secondary wash again and painted his hammer with a dark metal. Alright, with burnt umber and lamp black, mostly burnt umber, just a little bit of lamp black, we apply this wash onto his, well, all the metal, essentially. So we're doing our traditional apply, wipe the major areas, then apply again, and then wipe lightly. However, so to make it look a little dark and crusty, the wash was a bit thin, so I applied around 2 coats the first time, because unfortunately it was still too thin. I messed up again. And then I did a wiping on more thorough wiping all over. Just the deep dark crevices had the wash. So then what I did was, because the armor I sort of wanted to be a little crusty, I then applied a second wash onto it, but this time instead of like a, how do I put it? I basically loaded up my brush heavy and thick, and then I just tap on it so that it would spread out and just be everywhere on it. And then I did a much lighter wiping towards the end on the most raised areas and such, and it worked pretty well. Alright, now here's something I should have done earlier, but like I couldn't decide when to do it. So Balor Brown, Skeleton Horn Contrast, and Guilliman Flesh, we're going to paint his horns. So basically, a simple layer of Balor Brown, then with some watered down Skeleton Horn Contrast, we're going to paint it all over the horns. Then I'm going to do some subsequent ones. We're going to do a layer of Skeleton Horn Contrast around halfway, 2/3 through the horns all the way to the tip, and then the last third. And then with a little bit of watered down Guilliman Flesh, we'll apply this on the last 1/4 or so. Alright, with Iron Warriors, Warp Block Bronze, Runefang Steel Air, Skeleton Horde Contrast, and Guilliman Flesh, we're going to add a little bit of depth to the model. Alright, so we're going to add a bunch of dark nicks. So first we're going to start off with Iron Warriors. This is dark paint. We're going to apply this like on his edge blade thingy that he has on his shoulder pad, and we're going to make our own like cuts and nicks here and there. We're just going to paint like thin lines here and there all throughout add some depth, even some on his hammer. The hammer has like these pre-made like gashes in there, so I'm going to paint part of it or fill in the gaps with this iron wires. And then with Warplock Bronze, we're going to paint around the area, just light taps around where there's the metal cuts that we've made, essentially. And this is going to make it look like there's rusting and stuff like there. Add a little bit of depth. Don't forget the shield. And then with Runefang Steel Air, we're going to apply tiny little dots of this in areas to make it look like some parts of this are fresh cuts or freshly grinded, stuff like that. So have fun with that. And then with Skeleton Horde Contrast, we're going to apply a little bit of this onto both ends of his hammer. And then with some regular Guilliman flesh, dilute a little bit, we're going to apply it onto the, sparingly in like paint lines, we're going to paint like strips onto the edges of hammer to make it flow better or like flutter a little bit. And then with Liquitex Gloss Varnish, we're going to apply a little bit of this, a thin layer onto the maggots coming out of his belly and his open cut wounds things. Alright, now this is something I rarely cover, but because a lot of my painting is done with these thin washes, the actual paint on the model is, well, very thin. And since I handle most of these models not from like a stand or anything, sometimes paint comes off. So here towards the end of it, from me grabbing it up top, the ropes have their paint ripped off, and the top piece of wood, it has some paint ripped off. This is after like 2 or 3 coats of varnish, by the way. It happens, so just letting you know, this is something that consistently happens. So like right now I just take care of a lot of small details here and there, just retouch up some things, and then add a few more layers of varnish, and the model will be handled, hopefully not by there, but like by his shield and the metal parts, because the metal has varnish mixed into it, so it's very strong. And done. A very simple assembly and simple base in the old style of my old Nurgle army, my personal army. And yeah. Alright, so looking at him, there's some obviously interesting things. So the neon green metal at first was kind of bad, but it really did work well with all the shading added. And the way the shadows were moved with the wiping in specific areas and stuff created these nice areas where the light seems to focus naturally. So first I was worried about the neon green, but it worked out really well. The heads at the back, using a lot of the oil washes or oil paint mixed in to create the reddening and stuff like that, they look really good. The hammer looks really good, especially I also painted like strips of Runefang Steel Air across like parts of the hammer to add some more character, like cuts and stuff, like newly shaved off pieces of metal. It looks nice. The cloth looks good. His flesh looks dead. Okay, but well, that's technically the point. The rotting is good. The oil washes did really good with the maggots. It really shows in there, like they're, because the maggots basically are like cones with like little rings in them, and so the oil wash can get into there and really make it pop. Overall though, the horns kind of stand out badly. I'm gonna have to say overall it is an 8 out of 10. I kept trying to look at it and trying to think of to make it pop more, but I don't know, maybe it's just the model. I couldn't figure out how to make it pop or be more, but it like has a nice subtle coloration, nothing's too extreme and stuff like that. Overall he looks pretty good. Simple as. And this is probably the best version I've painted of him. I've seen my previous versions because someone commented on them and I looked at them and was like, dang, I've gotten so much better as a painter. Or I sucked back then. But this is probably the best version of this. I mean, this was very simple, easy, quick to do. The metal cuts and flecks and stuff I painted everywhere added a lot of character. A good amount of less is more. It's like not too much of things overpowering it. The color transitions are good. The color is bright and clear. It looks good. A good 8 out of 10. Alright, so like the video if you like the video, comment if you want to comment, share it if you want to share it, and more to come. Bye.